The Empire Humiliated, the Sack of Panama, 1671. The year is 1671. The air in the Caribbean is thick, not just with the humid heat of the tropics, but with the scent of impending doom. For over a century, the Spanish Empire has held the New World in a fist of iron and velvet, draining the veins of the earth to fill the coffers of Madrid. At the center of this vast, sprawling web of wealth lies a single point of failure, a city known as the Golden Cup. Panama. To the Spanish king, Panama was not just a colony, it was the vital artery of the Americas. It was the narrow bridge where the silver of Potosi, mined from the freezing heights of the Andes, met the warm waters of the Caribbean. It was a place of stone cathedrals, merchant palaces, and warehouses that groaned under the weight of Peruvian emeralds and bars of pure silver. It was a city that believed itself protected by God, by the jungle, and by the sheer impossibility of the terrain that surrounded it. But the world was changing. The old giants were slowing down, becoming heavy with their own riches. And in the shadows of Jamaica and Tortuga, a new kind of power was rising, a brotherhood of the desperate, led by a man who saw the world not as a map of borders, but as a list of targets. Henry Morgan. He was not a king, nor a traditional general. He was a creature of the frontier, a privateer who understood that the greatest weakness of an empire is its own arrogance. In late 1670, Morgan gathered a force that would haunt Spanish nightmares for generations. More than 1,000 hardened men, some sources say 1,200, others 1,400, men from all corners of the earth who shared one thing, a hunger that could not be sated. These were not soldiers of a crown, they were predators of the sea. And they were about to attempt the unthinkable. The campaign began not with a whisper, but with the roar of cannons at the mouth of the Chagres River. Fort San Lorenzo stood as the sentinel of the isthmus, a massive stone fortress perched on a jagged cliff, commanding the entrance to the interior. On December 27, 1670, the pirates struck. The battle for San Lorenzo was a brutal, grinding affair. Morgan's men did not simply charge the gates, they were tacticians of chaos. They attacked from the river, they scaled the cliffs, and they utilized the high ground of the surrounding hills to rain fire down upon the defenders. The Spanish commander, Don Juan Pérez de Guzmán y Gonzaga, had ordered his men to hold to the last breath. The struggle was a symphony of clashing steel and the screams of men falling into the surf below. When the smoke finally cleared, the fortress was a charnel house. The sentinel had fallen. The gates to the isthmus were kicked wide open. But the true enemy was not the Spanish musket, it was the land itself. The march across the Isthmus of Panama is a journey that has broken the spirits of better men. Morgan chose the river route, but as they pushed deeper into the emerald darkness of the jungle, they realized the Spanish had prepared a different kind of welcome. Don Juan Pérez de Guzmán had enacted a scorched earth policy of terrifying efficiency. Every village was a heap of cooling ash. Every farm was stripped of its grain. Every cow, every pig, every chicken was slaughtered and carried away or burned. The pirates, who had expected to feast on the spoils of the land, found themselves marching through a vacuum. By the third day, the hunger began to bite. By the fifth day, it was a physical weight, dragging at their limbs. Contemporary accounts from those who survived the march tell of men falling to their knees, not to pray, but to scavenge for anything that could be swallowed. They began to slice their own leather belts and the scabbards of their swords into thin strips. They soaked the hide in water, pounded it with stones to soften the fibers, and charred it over small fires. This was the diet of the men who would humble an empire: raw leather, wild berries, and the bitter water of the swamps. There was no grand poetry in these moments. There was only the sound of 1,000 men breathing in the humid dark, fueled by a singular, obsessive vision, the glint of silver at the end of the trail. On the 9th day, the canopy finally broke. The privateers emerged from the suffocating green onto the heights above the Pacific Ocean. And there, stretched out along the coast like a prize waiting to be taken, was Panama City. The Spanish governor was not hiding behind his walls. Don Juan Pérez de Guzmán y Gonzaga had assembled his forces on the plains of Matapalo, just outside the city. It was a formal, majestic display of 17th-century warfare. 2,000 infantry in disciplined lines, 400 cavalry with polished breastplates, and a plan that he believed would shatter the pirate rabble once and for all. According to the chronicles of the time, the Spanish had gathered a massive herd of wild bulls, driven by skilled vaqueros. The plan was simple: as the pirates attacked, the bulls would be unleashed, a tide of horns and muscle that would trample the invaders into the dust. But Morgan's men were not a traditional army. They did not fear the chaos, they lived in it. As the battle commenced under a scorching sun, the pirates formed a hollow square, their musketeers kneeling with lethal calm. When the bulls were driven forward, the air was filled not with the sound of panic, but with the rhythmic crack of precision fire. The pirates did not waste their lead on the animals. They targeted the drivers. The result was a catastrophe for the Spanish. Without the vaqueros to guide them, the herd turned back in terror. The wild bulls charged not into the pirate lines, but directly through the Spanish infantry, shattering their formations and spreading a contagion of fear. The Spanish cavalry charged bravely, their lances leveled, but the ground was soft and muddy from the seasonal rains. Their horses floundered. The pirates, standing firm, picked them off one by one. The Golden Cup was no longer a fortress, it was a slaughterhouse. By noon, the Spanish army, the pride of the Pacific, was in full retreat, fleeing back toward the city gates in a desperate scramble for survival. But as the pirates breached the walls, they found a city in its death throes. Don Juan, realizing that his defense had failed, made a choice that would haunt the history of Panama forever. He ordered the gunpowder magazines to be ignited. The explosions were gargantuan. Stone houses that had stood for a century were reduced to rubble in an instant. The fires spread with a terrifying speed, jumping from wooden balcony to wooden balcony, fueled by the sea breeze. Panama City, the jewel of the Spanish crown, became a funeral pyre. For 3 weeks, Morgan's men occupied a city of ghosts and ash.
Look at this hall.
They were not greeted with chests of silver laid out in the streets.
More than the ship itself.
Much of the royal treasure, the immense wealth destined for the King of Spain, had already been loaded onto ships and sent into the deep Pacific days before. The pirates had captured a ruin. But their greed was as persistent as their hunger had been. They became torturers, scouring the smoldering basements and the charred remains of cathedrals. They dragged the survivors from the rubble, demanding the location of every hidden coin and every buried emerald. This was the ultimate humiliation of an empire. This was not a treaty signed in a palace, it was extortion in the mud. To secure their departure, Morgan demanded a ransom that would strip the city of its remaining soul. The Spaniards were forced to collect the scorched silver from the church altars, the wedding bands from the fingers of survivors, and the last coins from the pockets of the dead. When Morgan finally marched away, he did so with a caravan of 175 mules, their backs straining under the weight of silver and gold. It was a massive haul, yet for the men who had eaten their boots to get there, it felt like a pittance compared to the legends they had chased. But the final act of this drama was one of betrayal. As the force moved back toward the Caribbean coast, the Brotherhood began to dissolve. Suspicion hung heavy in the air. Morgan, ever the pragmatist, was later accused by his own men of secretly siphoning off the best of the loot, the finest jewels and the heaviest gold, loading them onto his personal vessel and slipping away into the night, leaving his weary, bloodied comrades to divide what was left. The Sack of Panama in 1671 did not bring about the immediate collapse of the Spanish Empire. The crown was a colossus that would continue to breathe for another 200 years. Panama itself was rebuilt 2 years later in a new, more defensible location, with walls so thick they still stand today as a testament to Spanish resilience. But something fundamental had broken. The attack shattered the myth of Spanish invulnerability. It proved that the most critical artery of the empire could be severed by a band of outcasts. It showed the world that a global superpower could be held for ransom, forced to negotiate with the very men it branded as animals. Henry Morgan's return to England was not a journey to the gallows. Though he was briefly caught in the gears of international diplomacy and faced investigation, he was ultimately celebrated as a hero of the English cause. In 1674, King Charles II laid a sword upon his shoulder and dubbed him a knight. The man who had burned the Golden Cup died as Sir Henry Morgan, Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, a wealthy planter who ended his days looking out over the sea he had conquered. The ruins of Panama Viejo stand today as a silent, charred monument to those 3 weeks in 1671. They are a reminder that empires are not destroyed by external armies alone, but by the moment they realize they can no longer protect what they value most. Panama did not end an empire, but it proved that even the greatest power on earth can be brought to its knees by hunger, by desperation, and by men who no longer feared the darkness of the jungle or the judgment of kings. In the end, history is not just a record of who won and who lost. It is a record of the price that was paid. And in 1671, the Spanish Empire paid the highest price of all, its pride. The fires of Panama have long since cooled, and the silver Morgan stole has been scattered to the four corners of the earth. But the questions remain, etched in the charred stones of Panama Viejo. Was Henry Morgan a visionary strategist who saw the cracks in a dying empire, or simply a cold-blooded opportunist who betrayed his own men for a chest of gold? Some see him as a hero of the English crown, others, as the man who turned the Caribbean into a slaughterhouse. But what about you? In the eternal struggle between pirates and empires, where do your loyalties lie? Do you side with the disciplined order of the Spanish crown, trying to hold a crumbling world together? Or do you find yourself drawn to the lawless freedom of the privateers, who chose to eat their own leather boots rather than live under the thumb of a king? History is a vast ocean, and we have only just begun to sail its darkest waters. If you want to see more empires fall and more legends rise, if you want to dive deeper into the untold stories of those who dared to defy the world, then join our crew. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to ensure you never miss a voyage. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Morgan's betrayal. Was it calculated genius or the ultimate sin among thieves? Your comments are the wind in our sails, helping us bring more of these epic tales to life. I am your guide through the wreckage of time. This is Pirates vs. Empires. Fair winds, and follow the stars. We will meet again on the next horizon.